Okay, welcome back, and a wonderful thank you to Ben C, Jimmy C, Adam C, and Adra B. Guys, those those are so welcome. Thank you so much for those contributions this week. You're making you're keeping us going. What a wonderful group you've been. These are recurring donations, folks. Anybody wants to get in on that, please do. Please be my guest and be helpful to the content if you find benefit with it and you think others would. Much appreciated. Had a having a conversation with Degas. Funny. One of my fellow students said that once. He said that he got really worried about Gamel one day when Gamel sat us all down and said, "I had a conversation with Degas last night." I feel like that guy at this moment. I had a conversation with Degas. At one point, Degas says something like, painting doesn't expand, it returns on itself. And I would like to say it keeps coming back to itself. That's a paraphrase and probably not a particularly perfect one, but there's something about that idea that it's out there just becoming more and more and more and more whatever, sort of in the modern era. And so yeah, it really has my Degas really has my attention because I sense that that's so. And don't I talk to you from time to time about what's the nature of our form? What's the very nature of this form? Because it has a nature. Music has its own nature. It's different from painting. From painting is different from sculpture. These things all have their own natures, the nature of the form. And so it's kind of a big deal. It goes with this kind of a conversation from Isaiah, who likes to call me Uncle Paul for some reason. Do you think that throughout history the world has remained more or less the same, but our views have changed? Now, he's talking about painting. Has the world, but our views have changed. So he's obviously sort of resisting the idea of progress. How much has changed between Caravaggio and Bouguereau? Both had great vision and both had small mistakes. Also, what would you like to say to those who think that the camera has deeply influenced the art of painting? Why do they ignore Holbein, Carlo Dolci, Jacques Louis David, etc., who worked at a very high quality level before the camera? We don't owe the progress of art to the invention of the camera. And I think Sargent would have thought so too. I'm curious about your views on this topic, and with my best regards, Isa E. Thank you for commenting. And folks, by the way, please send your comments, any old thing that's coming into your mind that might be a point of interest relating to our field, to the extent you want to hear from me about it, at least. I keep saying that what I am is a practitioner of this form. I'm not the long historian. I'm not the art philosopher. But these kinds of things come to us all, these kinds of questions as they have to Isaiah. Do you think that throughout history, the world has remained more or less the same, but our views have changed? I'm going to show you a painting that says that that's so. You're going to see how the world is more or less the same. Our costumes have changed. The kinds of stuff we paint with has changed. But you probably already know the painting hasn't changed. But there's this crazy thing that's been built into us. It's we're almost like we're hypnotized to believe that there's such a thing as progress, that everything is just getting better and better and better. I'd like to say that there's an argument to be made for that, but the argument isn't that it's getting better, but coming more closely to what it actually is, potentially. But there's a tendency in nature also to break up. What is the second law of thermodynamics, or whatever? That there's a tendency for things, to get more complex and more broken up and become less pure, more adulterated, less what they really are. But there's kind of an interesting thing, and that sounds like philosophical conversation, so I'll get back out of there. But there's stuff that fascinates all of us in that. How much has changed between Caravaggio and Bouguereau? Well, you're talking about a fairly short window of time, and I'm going to take us back to like 700 AD. And I could go back farther. I just chose to these because I was fascinated by the particular pictures I was looking at. And they're coming from China, which is a whole different place from our normal conversation. So, which lends the discussion some more some more depth with the idea that the world has remained more or less the same. We're thinking so frequently about the West, about everything's from the Renaissance to now, or even, or maybe from the Greeks till now. But we're going to look at Chinese paintings, Chinese scroll. That's all we're going to look at, and we're going to compare them to some stuff today, just to see what's the same, what's different, and you can sort of work out for yourself whether or not the uh, which side you'd like to take, shall we say. I apologize. I'm without coffee today, and I'm trying to do, and I have a headache, so it's a kind of stuff that it's my brain is sitting down there on my thoughts. Mm. Okay, both had great vision, both had small mistakes. Well, painters, we're all live within our means. One of the things I like about us this being a handcraft, and where every person, in terms of trying to get educated, has his own problems, trying to get to the depth of the knowledge that he needs. I don't think, you look at all of history, everybody says the same thing about how difficult it is to learn. And you see in the Renaissance, these guys, they had as much struggle to figure it out as we, who had our knees cut out from under us by the destruction of the schools that were teaching what the stuff we like to paint, this representational painting thing we do. So, yeah, small mistakes, great vision. We all use our eyes. We all see more or less the same. There are people that are doing curious things with it, but mostly we have, we draw with reasonable proportions and et cetera, et cetera. But I'll look at some of those things too. Also, what would you like to say to those who think the camera has deeply influenced the art of painting? Well, it's influencing it now. It's causing people to think they don't have to learn to draw. It's causing people to, as it were, cheat the system. But now you can listen to me say that, but I'm talking about believing the value of this as a form is in what you do with your hands. And I'm inclined to say that what the camera does is its own art. It's a different form. It brings something different to the game, but I don't think it's the same game. You see what I mean? At the end of the day. So a lot of modern guys thought that it was all over when the camera arrived. The modernists, part of the reasons they went modern apparently is because it's all been done now. It's all been done. The camera, now you can't, what's all been done? Learning to see has all been done. Learning to see is what we all need to do with our lives, with our paintings. But our painting is just a way, and we need to learn to see. But with a camera, you don't need to learn to see, do you? Or do you? You can have that as your own possibility. But why do they ignore Holbein, Carlo Dolci, Jacques Louis David? Who I don't know who they is. I think most people, and I'm more the representational painters today, we like all these guys probably. I certainly do. Holbein, David, all these guys, all different guys doing different things, and the quality of their work is, one of the things that's true in that era is that there was an amazing quality. And yeah, you can go look, like we were looking at the National Gallery in London, and it was impressive how many pictures are not of great quality, and are falling apart, and so on and so forth. So, we all have those. There's one of the Yangs I was looking at the D'Orsay's got massive rings of cracks. So, so high quality level, if you mean craft, I mean, that's all over the place for everybody, right? That's part of the thing, part of being a human, actually. People forget, that Vermeer just disappeared. He was forgotten for some very long period of time, 150 years or so, I don't know, somewhere in there. We don't owe the progress of art to the invention of the camera. No, we certainly don't, by any means. Um, and 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 there are ways in which it obviously can be an aid to the thing we are doing, but it does bring us information at times and other things. Um, and I think Sargent would have thought so too. That we don't know. No, it's absolutely so. But it's interesting that the camera arrives at a point when virtually everybody could draw accurately. Isn't that interesting? Because what is that telling us? Is that trying to get us back to our roots and figure out what the nature of our form is? Because if it's not just about rendering, um, more accurately than the last guy, what is it? Well, all painters thought it was something else. It was never about that. And that's where I'm sure you'd love to head with this, but I'm just going to talk about, let's just talk about it. Let's just talk about it. Let's just 700 AD, and I'm going to ask you what's not to love here. I don't know who this is, and I apologize to my Chinese friends for not knowing who it is. I read, and I should have noted it, but I wasn't taking notes of any names for this painting. Maybe sorry to say for some of you, but I'm looking at this thing, thinking, this is great drawing. 700 A.D. Does anybody draw any better than that today? Now if you are the realist and you think somebody draws more literally than this, you won't be in good company though, because Degas is saying it's got nothing to do with that. Harmony is the point. Doesn't he make that exactly? Side by side. So in the 900s, though, this is the one I found. It's a big old scroll. Actually, I don't know how big it is, but it's a very long story thing here. It appears that there's some sort of an event, or two or three, and there's music involved. There's some eating involved, or some cafe stuff involved over here. But I picked this because I was rather astonished at 900 AD that there could be this quality of representation. Beautiful gestures, beautiful color schemes and parts, different parts having different color schemes. Beautiful drawing, beautiful expression in the faces, beautiful gesture, beautiful, well, I said that already, didn't I? And patterning. What is it we know today that they didn't know? It's kind of an interesting question. So in answer to in discussing that first point, do you think throughout history, the world has remained more or less the same, but our views have changed? Everything I'm doing now is going to be based on that question. So here we're looking at this. This thing looks like it could be modern French painting, like 19th century French painting. From this distance, you're looking at it very small like this. And I'll blow some of it up a little bigger so you can see it. But again, these things look like they could easily be different French painters, apart from their costumes. Quality, gesture, good proportions, things like spotting, patterning. You see so many different possibilities or different painters. Look at this. Who do you think of? I just think of so much Western art. This is 900. I doubt that any of these people knew this work. I doubt that anybody in the 19th century knew this work right from the Renaissance forward. I doubt it. I may be wrong. Maybe they all knew it, but I doubt it. I doubt that many of them knew this. And yet so much is here. So much is here already. I'm about to sneeze, Mr. Producer. So, but yeah, you can probably see already some things they don't have, and there's some very obvious things they don't have. They certainly have a sense of humor. I love this. I love this guy sitting here with, as it were, no legs and his feet showing up down here. It's sort of where his feet would be, but it's just the shoes. There's this fascinating sense of humor. But yeah. Yeah. So let's see what they got. Okay. So what we did see is they don't have perspective. Yeah. You could look at any of these things. You can see how this line here, presuming this is a box, these things all would have, traveled up to the same vanishing point. By the way, it's interesting that we're looking down on everybody. That idea of looking down on somebody, it creates the need for something like perspective. And they do have the angles going back away. They do have that. They just hadn't figured out at this point, or if it's just at this point. I mean, we see a lot earlier stuff. I think it's Pompeian possibly, or Roman, whatever. There's some, they're having just the same struggles. So that wasn't something that the Renaissance guys grabbed out of the past. It would appear, because it sort of wasn't there. But the idea of vanishing points, they're unknown, these people. Look how this appears to be going wider, and this appears to be going wider this way. And these presumably would be square tabletops and so on. So, but there's certainly intimations of perspective. It's just not there. The knowledge that's in this Degas, which by the way is also seen from above, we can actually figure out exactly the eye level of the person, so that we're the eye level. This is the eye level. You can tell it. You can do it based on perspective. If the lines these lines are going up, these lines are coming down, they'll all go to the vanishing point, which appears to be rather the eye level of all these people standing in the room. So that's a thing. Okay, so that perspective has improved. Yeah, that awareness of how the world works to create that illusion more effectively. But still, these guys are doing pretty good with this overlapping of figures. They have this person in front, sitting in the chair, chair here, person in front, this person overlapping that person. Obviously, they're having no trouble with putting people in front and behind. It's not like they're doing side by side like you sometimes think the Parthenon or others. Or even earlier parts of this picture, where it looks like they're just spotting some characters around. They're not just doing that. So I put in some words for you just to follow up on this. One thing that's also missing from this, and is fairly characteristically missing from Oriental art, and I should say, Chinese, Japanese art, is the what Degas bring. I mean, sorry, what Leonardo brings to the game, and that is light on an object. The whole discussion of light on an object, and shadows. The atmospheric shadow is, when did that show up? But these guys really don't have shadows. They have a curious sense of light, though. It's very fascinating that they actually use values to say light things, and they're really using them. They're having values set off other values. But this idea of light and shade doesn't seem to be there yet. Now, keep remembering, though, that they are, so that's a kind of an improvement, but it's an improvement of getting a fuller grasp. But we get all the way down to a fuller grasp on our world, visual. Remember, that's all we're talking about is we're all looking at the same world. We're all very bright human beings. We're not getting smarter and smarter. If these people could do this in 900, so what was that? That would be 1,000, more than 1,000 years ago. We get these ideas that we're so smart. It tickles me. But in our world, there's so much beauty. There's so much beauty in this, and so many principles related to our form and design, for example. Even the idea, Leonardo's idea of featuring, of detaching from the background that I just mentioned in the previous one, by overlapping, making this person light in front of that person, using lights, finding ways to feature, to make one thing stand in front of the other. It's already there. So it's just, you might say it's embryonic, but it's there. The mind of man hasn't gone anywhere. I'm told that in that era, most people working on this were just people with, wasn't necessarily a lot of people, and it was people with just a lot of money, so to speak, people well-to-do, high aristocratic types or whatever, who had the ability, the leisure. Maybe that leisure thing is, obviously it matters in developing our forms. There's the narrative is there and all this stuff. The more people that are involved, the better. But the narrative, here's this. This is just the storytelling, listening to the person play the viol, the lute or whatever that might be in China. Here's Degas' father listening to Paganini or whoever that was playing was it Paganini? Playing the guitar. I think it wasn't Paganini, who was the guitarist of that era. But look, it's exactly the same story. The gestures are every bit as telling. This guy's got his hands clasped in that sort of a listening mode, calming himself to listen. Look at the background. The background's real. The background. Look at this. Furniture. What's different? Come on. What's different? So here's Whistler flattening the whole story out a bit, right? Both these guys seem to be living in more or less an increasingly flat world. Not when they're round, but their thinking seems to be significantly flat, as it were, in the same way as this thinking is flat. And you wonder if there's a connection there as the influence of Japanese art became really serious about the time of Degas. But the narrative is always a thing. It's always going to be there. It's part of the reason we make pictures, to tell a story. Also, the idea of beauty, the aesthetic, the beauty of the female figure is a major attraction to the painter. The use of drapery, the use of stories like music stories that enhance the spirit of the aesthetic of beauty and the song and what would you call that? That stuff that is the stuff that elevates the mind and lifts the soul. So there's this is the aesthetic movement down there. That's not a new thing. Here's the realism of subject. Look at the waitress or whatever coming and giving these people their whatever, their drinks or whatever, as they seem to be sitting in what looks like a British pub, well, an Irish pub. My recent experience in London is paying off here, isn't it, Ollie? So, but you see all the same thing. It's the realism of subject. They're just everyday life. The genre stuff that the Dutch were doing isn't new. The Japanese were doing it. There's standard scenes of everyday life persistent back then. It was not a new thing. Realism of subject, and even the realism in the sense of tawdry realism, and some low life being represented and that sort of thing. But again, I recommend you have a look at the attention these people with their gestures, their expression, their faces that they're paying to the person who's coming in, and the conversations, and this is a very remarkably complex thing from the point of view of a novelist, shall we say? There's a lot going on there, and it's still no perspective, of course. Complex groupings. I've sort of alluded to that already, but the idea of filling a room with people and stacking people in front and using them to feature each other and to set each other off and to make fascinating groupings, storytelling groupings, the whole thing. Here's one of those things people think Degas thinks this up. Here's a person standing behind a door, half hidden behind a door. Nothing new under the sun. And the persistent lack of perspective. Interesting. That is one of those things. It's a very interesting thing. But this also suggests the coming of light into the room. Have I talked about that yet? But the coming of not light on an object as much as this idea of light in the impressionist sense. So this is light, and the light source now is showing that's not something new, but it's not something new to man. People have always had candles and all sorts of other things. Light sources have shown. Are known. Whether people were inclined to paint with them, might have been because they didn't have enough light to do their painting, or there might have been a dozen other things. I'm feeling a little dense this morning, so let's just move on right through this. Here's the idea of color schemes. Degas didn't invent that. Veronese didn't invent that. I'm guessing that these guys in 1900 didn't invent that. As long as man has made colors, he's made colors go together. And this is an art of color. Well, of course, there are going to be color schemes. This is 900, they're color schemes. It seems like Western art went really sleepy when it comes to color schemes. And my visit to Europe convinced me even more. Wall after wall of pictures that are just like so not pleasing, not music by way of color and color schemes. And plenty that are, of course, and I don't mean to take it down, but I've said that before, but having been there now and seen them in person, it's borne out. So color schemes, yeah, always there already. Cutting off figures, this is already happening. This figure's being cut off here by that. This guy's being cut off here. Yeah. So. So that's not a new thing to put posts in the way or doorway. In the doorway, I think there's a doorway up there, the previous one. Right here, yeah, I was talking about that person in the doorway there. So that's not a new idea. Some people think that was somehow new. People write in books that these things are new. Degas doing flatness, but there's a fascination to the patterning in the purest sense of that word, in the flattest sense of that word. There's something fascinating about our world. Every once in a while, you see stuff on the ground and there is no lostness. It's just the time of day or the whatever, and it's not a lost and found world. It's a cutout world, and it takes us. We have to have the wit to notice what world we're in when we're making pictures and play it up. Use that world. Make that our meat and potatoes for that particular moment in space, in time, whatever. Of course, these guys were living in a relatively flat world for that reason of not having light and shade and not having lostness. But you can see how the world, the third dimension is hugely enhanced by the possibilities that lost and found bring, by the visual order that we talked about, that sort of stuff. But it's not that it's not there. Lostness is already here. This whole thing is one value just walking into the other one, right? And in fact, even has this sense of humor that Degas shares of having it look like the feet holding up this mirror or whatever it is are mirrored by his feet. And then another play of a variety on feet, variation on feet. It's just entertainment in the same sense as Degas, right? But yeah, Lossness, it comes into its own in our era where it becomes really a fine plaything when we get into this, what Degas is doing in worlds like this. And patterning, becomes something far more exciting. This idea of throwing the big fiddle leaf, the fiddle heads up here, and having the women's hair turn into fiddle heads and dance across the page and just exit the stage, as it were, as darks. I mean, this stuff here, this is the entertainment that is latent in something as simple as this, already sort of sitting here in this world. And Degas, of course, takes it to places it's never been. But is it something new? I'm suggesting it really isn't abstract patterning. Just the idea of a dark pattern, an interesting dark pattern, has always been there. Interesting light patterns, it's always been there. And the distribution of patterns, dark, light patterns and dark patterns, distribution of them. It's not a new thing. Degas dedicates himself, in my view, to I think trying to get his head around all the stuff that encompasses our world. He's got a sort of an epic exercise in pursuing every aspect of what makes our world uniquely what it is, our form. And that is a culmination, much more than it's an expansion. It's a focusing, it's a refocusing of all the stuff and putting it all together in one place, or so much of it together in one place. But I think I passed something here. They don't have much movement in these things. I'll give them that. The gestures, but this idea of movement and getting movement, I say that in that one painting. I think you'll see that the horse picture does have a sense of movement in a sense. But the movement is something that goes in and out of Western art. The Greek sculpture is very stiff in some places, and then it's alive, very lively in other places. But the stiff and the Rodin versus a lot of his contemporaries. The guy was painting live. His stuff was fluid, I guess would be a good way to say it. And Lost and Found begins to give you an opportunity, but they're already doing, as what we just looked at here. Wherever I looked at it, Lost and Found gives you an opportunity to do even more remarkable things with movement, but or even different movement via different means. But this Bruegel's does stuff that's basically like the Japanese in its cutoutness. It's very like the Chinese. I mean, in that picture we're just looking at. But you can see he's involved in a way where he's trying to get people running after each other, and he's being very effective at it. I'm betting that was already done in some work in I know something, I've seen things like that in Japan going way back. So even in that, I'm simply saying I don't think there's much new being had there. Gesture and proportions. But, this picture here, Degas is sort of the famous for gesture. He seems to be exploring the world of like he explores everything. But he explores the world of gesture, and he's got all these different kinds of gestures. Some people doing stretching, some people listening, like this person, some guy holding forth, and the gesture, but the body language, the body doing the work. But look at the quality of this gesture here. This could not be more spectacular, right? That's just right on the money, amazing. As these two seem to be bringing breakfast in to somebody or other, maybe. Again, with that highly doubtful perspective. But look at the gesture, look at the proportions, and look at the elegance. Look at the elegance involved in all this stuff. That's not Degas particularly, although there is a kind of an elegance in that pose, where he does other things to some other poses other times. Gesturally sound, in other words, saying something, but not chasing down pretty. These guys. This is much more in the aesthetic line that you might find with the doing, for example. But yeah, that's the way it goes. Oh yeah, and then of course we come to us and the Impressionist light. That is a big shift, when what Monet brings into the game in this way of working with just splots of paint, is that something that's a product of technology, of the availability of oil, first the long evolution into oil and all it could do to make things more round, modeling wise and realistic that way. But but what he brings in that sense, especially when you get to the Boston School guys like this Tarbell, is like when you get indoors and the light is in the room, that's a whole different thing from what's going on here. Nevertheless, don't take anything away from these guys creating a sense of light in this space over here. Now you could say they had no choice, so there were some white dresses and some dark dresses, and so on. Sort of does go that way, doesn't it? But impressionist light, yeah, that's not something that they were working with. I don't think I've ever seen anything that suggests it. I have seen aspects of impressionism suggested by Leonardo, as I mentioned before. But maybe that's it for this exercise. Let me just um, um, let me just go back to the comment one more time. Do you think throughout history the world has remained more or less the same, but our views have changed? So I'm hoping you can read from what I'm saying that my general sense of it is, and for what it's worth, of course, is that the world hasn't changed much. The subject is still the same. The subject is still us and how we see ourselves with our own eyes, and the entertainment that can be had in the world color, the world value, the world shape. That it hasn't changed, hasn't gone anywhere. There might be odd offshoots. Like in my mind, just abstract painting is just an odd offshoot uh, of that. One of the limited aspects of this. But if you go all the way back, all those things look like they were there in 900, and so my guess is they've always been there. Cave paintings, cave drawings, all those things, the whole thing. So that that's fun. I hope I hope you enjoyed that. But I'm not a big fan of the idea of progress. I don't see us getting smarter. I don't see as individuals, as humans, as a race. We do have more information than we've ever had. We have fewer excuses than ever to do the right thing, to be doing the wrong thing. So, um, but yeah, with apologies for my frown, my sort of headachy expression today. Um, I want to thank again Ben C., Jimmy C., Adam C., and Adra B. for that excellent offering to keep us moving and to keep body and soul together for Mr. Producer. And just the encouragement is huge. Massively, massively appreciated. All right, guys. See you in the next one. I hope that's of some use to you, and you have a good week painting.